This week, exploring Alan Moore and Brian Bolland's Batman the Killing Joke from two viewpoints: the role of trauma and how humans react to it, as shown in the story, and how Barbara Gordon's horrible treatment in the story led to her becoming the beloved Oracle. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. Somehow, in nearly 14 years of doing this podcast, we've only barely touched on The Killing Joke. Back in episode 217, Kumar Mulele and I discussed several comic scripts, and the script to The Killing Joke was one of them, but we've never really done a deep discussion of that book. This time we will, but maybe not in the way we normally do. This episode features two of the speakers from Bowling Green State University's Batman in Popular Culture conference that was held last April. I was there in hopes of getting some guests for our To the Bat Polls podcast, and I succeeded at that, but going to the conference paid benefits for this show too. Later we'll get a view of the aftermath of The Killing Joke, a feminist nightmare of a story that nonetheless produced Barbara Gordon's second act as the beloved Oracle. But first up, William Weaver, a professor at John Carroll University, whose presentation was entitled, "You Had a Bad Day Once, Am I Right? The Recognition and Communication of Trauma in Moore and Bolland's Batman the Killing Joke." I talked to him recently, and we discussed that very topic. Here's the discussion. All right, I'm talking to Will Weaver, who is at John Carroll University in University Heights, Ohio, near Cleveland. How you doing?
Real well. How are you, Tim?
Okay. Yeah, so we met at the Bowling Green State University Batman Conference in April. And so you spoke at the conference about recognition and communication of trauma in The Killing Joke. So what's your background in understanding trauma?
Well, really my background is in communication.
Okay.
And that's how I approached the text of The Killing Joke, from a perspective of what is being communicated by both the characters within the narrative and also between the author and what's their point in telling this particular story to the audience. And of course, I was aware of Killing Joke forever. And I was mostly aware of it due to the ongoing critique of the content, particularly its treatment of women and specifically Barbara Gordon. Mm-hmm. And I figured, all right, when the conference opportunity came up, I figured I'm finally going to read this thing. I'm going to see what I think.
Why did you put it off for so long?
I don't know. Maybe I felt like it was spoiled. And I guess like Alan Moore hasn't really turned me on the way he's turned on other comics fans. So I never felt the need to engage. And I also recognized that it was sort of a one-off, this parallel part of the Batman mythos rather than part of the established continuity. So it seemed like it could live in a blip that I never touched and I wasn't losing anything for it. But what ultimately caused me to say yes to Killing Joke was over the Christmas holiday, I went to a Christmas concert. And I don't know about you, but there's no way I can get through a litany of holiday standards without an ongoing parade of cocktails. So it so happened that the bartender, when she hands me my sapphire martini with 2 olives and a small twist, extra dry, she's got the tattoo on the inside of her forearm of the Joker, ha 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 ha, from The Killing Joke, this now iconic. And I recognized it immediately, even though I had not yet read the material. Oh yeah, that's from Killing Joke. And it's that moment where Joker sees himself for the first time. And I thought, like, why would a grown-up have this emblazoned into their flesh? What is it about this story that has been ripped to pieces with absolute good cause for 2 decades now?
3, really.
Why
It's
would
1988, so...
Sure. Why would someone be compelled to put this into their skin, to wake up every day, to look at it every day? What is the message that this piece captures that makes it potent and that makes us continue to talk about it when there's plenty of other things we could be discussing? So, God help me, I started by watching the animated version.
Oh, no. Oh, dear.
Yeah. It could be all right. I told Tricia Ennis I dared to enjoy it, which which took some doing on my part. But and then I did swing around and I read the graphic novel. And after having read it, my initial thought was, I don't see what the big deal is. There's nothing happening here. Like, I don't understand it. 24 hours go by, and I can't stop thinking about it. And then 3 days go by, and it's still in my head. It wouldn't let go, even though, like, my initial feeling was it wasn't that great, and it was extremely ugly, and I don't know what I'm supposed to get out of this. So, as a scholar of communication, I immediately went to that toolkit. What is this saying? Maybe if I can interrogate what it's actually trying to say, or what the characters are saying to one another, then I can get an understanding of why we can't seem to shake this thing. And that's how I stumbled into this idea of trauma, when I started looking through some of the comlit and then unpacking some of the moving into the 20th century out of the 19th century psych-lit. Trauma lands clean on it, because in my feeling as a person who studies semiotics and who looks at the types of things that happen within a text, there's always some moment, whether it's a movie or whether it's a comic book, where the author speaks directly to the audience through the mouth of the characters. And I think in Killing Joke, that moment where Alan Moore is directly speaking to his audience is when he has Joker say to Batman, all it takes is one bad day to reduce the sanest man alive to lunacy. That's how far the world is from where I am. And then he goes on to say, you had a bad day once. Am I right? I know I am. I can tell you had a bad day and everything changed. And it was from that piece of dialogue where I unpacked this idea of trauma. What's the story about? If you ask that to a lot of people, you'll get a lot of different answers, which is part of what makes good literature compelling, the space for ambiguity. Some will say it's about Batman and Joker trying to come to some kind of terms to reach some form of understanding. Some will say that it's simply an expression of misogyny, and obviously I'm not going to say that it isn't. These are in-your-face components. But looking at it from a communication standpoint, I'm going to make the argument that the story is about trauma. It's about the recognition of the experience of trauma that binds these characters together. Joker's trauma, and when the piece goes into his origin story, is about his transformation, the loss of his previous life that gave him no out except insanity. With Batman, it's more or less the same thing. His trauma transformed him, and when we talk about the trauma literature, transformation is key to this notion of trauma. His experience of transformation goes back to watching his parents be murdered. That was his traumatic story that moved him into a direction that his life would not have moved into but for that transformative event. What binds these characters together is their mutual recognition that they've both been victims. And I don't want to use the word victim in a loaded sort of way, but they have experienced the transformative impact of trauma where there's no going back, that a new reality has flooded in to replace and supplant whatever potential their lives could have been prior to that moment. It's when we find Batman at the beginning of the story, it's this recognition of mutual trauma that makes him want to reach out and find the Joker's already escaped Arkham. And Joker's motive for having fled Arkham is his need to say to Batman, look, I know what happened to you. The same thing sort of happened to me too. I don't know quite what it was that happened to me because I've been so depersonalized and so fractured by what happened. I can't quite remember it straight, but I know it happened, and it's obviously happened to you too. So there's almost this existential need on the part of both these characters to say, I see what happened to you. I know who you are. I don't know anything else. We're never going to be friends, but we're kindred spirits in that we've both been through this particular kind of spiritual, psychological realignment of what the potentialities of life could be.
Mm-hmm. And in your talk, you went on to point out that that applies to practically every hero and villain in superhero comics.
Yeah, I think so. I think that if we expand this notion of trauma as part of literature, the origin stories of most heroes is almost a meditation on trauma before they're launched into the world, or the means by which they gain powers, unknown to mortal man, is through some kind of like horrific experience.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm Googling around a bit. So Alan Moore himself has said in interviews that he regrets this story. Partly, one reason was that he regretted crippling Barbara. He wished that he hadn't done that. And another reason was that he felt like, compared to Watchmen or V for Vendetta, where he had a big issue he was talking about, here he was just talking about Batman and the Joker, and he doesn't feel that there was any larger point to it. But yeah, it's interesting. You've actually found somewhat of a larger point in it.
Maybe. I think extrapolating it beyond like this story into like pointing to the larger mythos that connects to hero stories in general. Let's table that. Let's put that off to the side. If you just want to focus like on the story, I think it's as compelling to talk about an experience between like a handful of people that are united by whatever like collection of calamities than some world-shaking story. Quite frankly, I find V for Vendetta kind of a headache, and Watchmen for all of its brilliant concepts, and Dr. Manhattan is one of the great ideas in contemporary fiction as far as I'm concerned. Like it's more compelling as an idea than it necessarily is as a narrative. And Killing Joke, it is a horrible experience. It's not fun to read. It's something that haunts you, but it's something that I can say that I have extracted value from. Not value in a utilitarian sense, but that like artistic illumination.
When I was reading it again last night, something stuck out to me where, when Batman finds Gordon after his traumatic experience was generated by the Joker, Gordon is still ready to kind of fight back at the trauma or at madness, where, Joker wasn't, I guess. I don't know. Do you get anything out of Gordon's reaction? He tells Batman, "Bring in Joker by the book. We have to show him that our way works."
I think that Gordon is probably poorly written in here. I mean, I just said that it has artistic value, but it certainly is not without a litany of flaws. And there, I think Gordon's line, like, "You must bring him in by the book, you must show him our way works," or whatever it was he said in that panel, is really to set up the ambiguity of the ending. Gordon is making that statement to put in the minds of the reader, like, is Batman going to do it by the book? Or is he going to fly off the handle and kill Joker? And now there's not enough detail. There's not enough clues in the book to say how it ends. And I know people have said, some of the authors have gone on record to say Batman brings him in, whatever. I think Batman must kill Joker at the end. And I said this in my talk, because there's no character arc for Batman unless he does. One of the things that is interesting to me about the story is exactly how passive and reactive Batman is throughout. And that's very atypical of a hero. You see him responding to Joker, chasing Joker, not knowing what to do, powerless to stop him from violating the Gordons, showing up after the fact rather than in his role as defender. His only potential throughout to take the initiative would be in that last panel that was never drawn or published. If we assume that in narrative you have characters and those characters have journeys, which we call arcs, Batman has no arc whatsoever unless he finally steps up and slays Joker. So I'm going to officially state that's the most likely interpretation as far as I'm concerned. And that's why Gordon said what he said. It's simply to tee up the potential ambiguity at the end. So in that case, the Gordon character is not so much a character who's experienced something as he is a plot device.
Yeah, well, that's true. You know, Batman is playing catch up all the way through. He's not very effective as a hero, and maybe that's part of what's unsatisfying about the story is that unless he kills Joker, he's done nothing as a hero. It's not even really a superhero story, because he doesn't save the day. He doesn't, he has no effect on anything, unless he kills Joker. And that is like kind of too little too late.
Sure. He never has the initiative at any point in the story.
So, well, expand a little bit. What's your interest in comics in general? Are you a big reader of them, or?
Oh, absolutely. A profound reader. In fact, I find it almost impossible for me to do any work of significance unless I read a pile of comic books first.
I see. And well, now, what do you teach exactly? You said it was focused on communication.
Yes, indeed. I teach a course on communication and culture, really, called Communication Technology and Society, which looks at how our changing, is really anthropology, and how our changing patterns of communication, as aided with digital technology, transforms who we are, our conceptions of identities, both alone and as communities. And I also teach media production courses.
I see. Okay, so it's both like interpersonal communication and sort of maybe technological communication?
Yes. It's mediated and interpersonal. And if you look at most universities, there literally is a separation. Like, all the folks who are interpersonal, they're all clustered together in one group of offices. And all the folks who teach mediated communication, they're all clustered together in another group of offices. And if you look at the literature, that segregation is supported by it. The mediated people have their own stuff. It goes back through propaganda studies, really is the origin. It includes things like PR. Marketing is captured in there. If you jump on the other side of the divide and look at the interpersonal folks, you've got everything going back to Athens. I mean, you start with Aristotle and you move forward into all the psychology of contemporary. And at very few points do those things intersect, and when they do, they're often using different vocabulary. They discover the same phenomena through different routes, and so they don't work together very well. And my contention is that state of study is untenable compared to how people actually live their lives in the world. Mediated and interpersonal is now the same thing. Your interpersonal communication is happening via text. It's happening on Instagram. It's happening right now, half a world away between the two of us over Skype. So our notions of what constitute both mediation and interpersonal experience, and how we then think of ourselves relative to these communication experiences, it requires redefinition because it has been redefined in terms of our behaviors.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks a lot. It's interesting. Although, yeah, I still kind of scratch my head about. I mean, certainly the art in this is good, and I can see kind of the craft in like the scene changes and so forth. But as a story, it's just kind of, yeah, as you said, difficult to read.
No, it's a brutalization, and I've got to think that part of that is intentional as well. Like whatever can be said of Alan Moore, I think there's a certain contempt for the reader, or a I don't know, a good-natured spirit of violation. He definitely wants to like get underneath your fingernails, like a splinter. Like say what you want, and I think this story does that. But with regard to like locking into some of these features of trauma, especially things like dissociation of oneself, that motivation to create a separate identity, like a supervillain's identity or superhero's identity, and attachment to the traumatic event, where you find yourself having to go through this ritual of reenacting it over and over again, like going out every night to hunt bad guys. Like these adaptations that are key to the psychological phenomenon may not have been things that the authors set out to capture, but they did capture them, and maybe that was through a strong empathic sensitivity for the focus characters. There certainly is a poor empathic sensitivity for the other characters, but if you're talking about our two primary players, there's a certain ring of truth to their orientations, regardless of the monstrous business that they are about.
Supporters of our show at patreon.com/deconcomics can hear an outtake from our talk, in which Will tells me why the 80s translation of Lone Wolf and Cub is his favorite comic. Coming up, Tricia Ennis on Barbara Gordon as the most prominent example of the women in refrigerators trope, and as Oracle. How do you accept that a story you hate brought about a character you love? First, thanks to all our patrons, more classic episodes of Deconstructing Comics have been unlocked, and I'm releasing them at the rate of one per week, in reverse order. This week, a November 2007 episode in which Mulele had come to a realization about his comics career. The classic episodes will show up on our Facebook and Twitter, and they'll also be publicly available on our Patreon page. Check out all our goals and help us reach them at patreon.com/deconcomics.
Welcome to the Superman Fan Podcast. My name is Billy Hogan, and I will be your host. Before we begin our journey through the time barrier, please ensure that your red indestructible capes are securely fastened around your necks, so that we may all travel safely into the past to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, and World's Finest Comics. After we return from our journey, I encourage you to go to the website, thesupermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com. I look forward to have you join me each week to explore the Silver Age adventures of the Man of Steel.
Tricia Ennis is finishing a master's degree at Bowling Green State University, and at the Batman conference, her presentation was about Barbara Gordon in The Killing Joke and beyond. Here's my recent talk with her on that topic. I'm now talking with Tricia Ennis, who is in Toledo, Ohio. How are you, Tricia?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Okay. So Tricia was also at the Batman conference at Bowling Green State University. And now you're teaching there?
I'm finishing up my master's degree there in the popular culture program.
Okay. So then what comes after the master's?
That's the worst question anyone asks me, and they ask me far too often. Not a PhD, at least not currently. Much to the chagrin of some of my professors, I'm sure. I think I want to do more like books I love to do like long form research, and I love to write about comics. That would be great, or fandom, or both, all of the above. Also, a variety of other things. I'm still feeling it out.
Okay. So at the conference, you gave a presentation with a rather long title.
It did.
The Fridge is Full, Barbara Gordon, Oracle, and Reclaiming Narratives for Female Characters.
Yes.
So tell us what that was about.
The long title is because I have to do things in threes. It just feels better. So the idea that I had when I was trying to figure out what I was going to write about, I knew it had to be something to do with Barbara Gordon. And whether it was going to be something to do with Barbara Gordon as Batgirl or Barbara Gordon as Oracle was always a question, or something to do with Batgirl as like almost a mythology. There were a lot of ideas. And what it ended up coming back to was this concept of The Killing Joke, which is probably my least favorite comic that's ever been written. Not that I've read them all, but I'm pretty sure it will stay there. Because of what it does to Barbara Gordon and the fact that I love the character she becomes as a result of it. And I've had to talk about The Killing Joke more than once now in a paper because I really care about this Oracle character. And it's very annoying that the character had to come from this horrific thing, The Killing Joke being the horrific thing and also The Killing Joke itself being horrific. And you know, it annoys me a lot that that this character that I really love came from this thing that I really hate, which ultimately means that I'm gonna have to talk about it a lot in order to tell you, in order to tell you what was wrong with that and why the thing that came from it was so good. And the cool thing about it was the way that the character of Oracle was created from this thing that Alan Moore and DC Editorial decided to do with her, which is something that I came across when I was interviewing John Ostrander for an oral history of the Oracle character that I wrote for Sci-Fi a few years ago for her 50th anniversary.
Right. Yeah. I have a couple things in my notes here. Moore himself actually regrets doing The Killing Joke now.
He does.
But as probably a lot of listeners already know, in a 2006 interview with Wizard magazine, he said, I asked DC if they had any problem with me crippling Barbara Gordon, who was Batgirl at the time, and although I guess not very actively. And if I remember, I spoke to Len Wein, who was our editor on the project. He said, yeah, okay, cripple the bitch. It was probably one of the areas where they should have reined me in, but they didn't. And he's also said that more recently, 2016, I guess, he said he thought it was far too violent and sexualized a treatment for a simplistic comic book character like Batman, and a regrettable misstep on my part. But
yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, even he's not happy with it anymore, and I guess Bolland isn't happy with it either. He says it wasn't what he had kind of wanted to do as far as doing a Joker story, and yet somehow it's become held up as this, triumph of the comics medium.
Mm-hmm. It really is.
Yeah.
It's kind of appalling when you talk to really big fans of Batman, especially the ones that really like the Joker as a foil for Batman. Their favorite book is almost always The Killing Joke, which is why we come back to it so often, unfortunately. Even though technically when it was written, it was meant to be, it wasn't an Elseworld story, but it wasn't an in-continuity story. Mm-hmm. And they ended up keeping a lot of it in continuity. I don't even know why anymore. But
I guess because it was really popular. I don't know. It doesn't really make
very
any
popular.
sense to me, especially with the idea that I talked about with Will, that without killing Joker at the end, Batman has no character arc in the story. He's completely ineffective.
Yes, and a lot of people, like to think that, and I'm sure Will talked about this with you, like to think that Batman does kill Joker at the end. There's this sort of ambivalence with that last page of the just ongoing laughter that sort of trails off. And so a lot of people think that Batman killed Joker. Of course, there are a lot of other people who are like, Batman would never kill someone. And of course, if the idea of The Killing Joke is that it only takes one bad day to make a man insane, to make a man like Joker, and if Batman's going to win the day, he has to not become the Joker. He has to not kill him. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I'm definitely on the side of he doesn't kill the Joker at the end. And yeah, that doesn't really create a lot of arc for the character. But really, the story was always more about the Joker than it was anyone. So, and to be honest, to be 100% truthful, the Joker story in The Killing Joke is interesting. I don't know that I care to look at that character sympathetically from a personal perspective, but it's not a bad story. Like, it's definitely a good story if you take out, like, the 5 or 6 pages that I abhor to the degree that I do.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and, you know, if you think about it from Barbara's perspective, it's really kind of appalling how Batman doesn't, you know, not only does Batman not seem to, you know, care about it all that much in that ending, you know, laughing at the Joker's joke, but Barbara doesn't even seem to care about it. She's just like, you know, I hope my dad is okay.
Yes, and that is one of the things that I, upon rereading it for this paper, and also reading it alongside Oracle Year One, it's one of the biggest things that I think I noticed was that Barbara, even after she is shot, when she's in the hospital, obviously traumatized, crying, like clutching at Batman, is worried about her dad, is not worried about the fact that she's been shot, that she's in awful pain, that all of these things have happened to her. It's implied that she is somehow sexually assaulted. You know, all these things have happened to her, and her main concern is, he has my dad, you have to go save him. Which, even with a character like Oracle, doesn't seem, or like Barbara Gordon, she's not Oracle yet, doesn't seem like something that, like, you would worry about yourself a little bit, even if your dad was just captured by the Joker.
Yeah. I mean, it's logical, you know, if she had just been like traumatized a little bit, not shot, you know, you could see her saying it then, but considering her situation, it doesn't really make sense.
Right. If she was maybe left in her apartment, not on the ground bleeding and almost dead, you know, if she had been knocked out or, you know, thrown into a closet or something had been done to her and she'd seen her dad taken, yeah, I could see her, you know, main concern being, he has my father. But because she was so horribly injured and, you know, her clothes were stripped off of her and she had photos taken of her and, you know, in various states of undress, and like the Joker was taunting her as she's bleeding out on her own floor, that seems a little beyond the pale, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, in 1988, I was not paying very close attention to comics, and so I don't think I even knew about The Killing Joke until about 15 or 20 years later. But yeah, I mean, I've never really liked it. I mean, I can see the craft in it, but yeah, as a story, it's pretty uncomfortable. You know, even if they had paid more attention to Barbara's feelings, it's still a pretty unpleasant story. But yeah, not being a DC guy ever in my life, I really wasn't very aware of what happened after that. And I listened to my recording of your talk again, and so then I looked up the Batman Chronicles number 5 from 1996 that you mentioned in your talk, what's called Oracle Year One. And that got me a little bit up to speed. We'll talk about what happens in that issue.
So in Oracle Year One, it was actually a few years after they'd created the character. John Ostrander and Kim Yale, who were a married couple, who had been working on Suicide Squad. They launched Suicide Squad around the same time that The Killing Joke happened. And the way that John Ostrander told me was that The Killing Joke happened, and they were all, you know, in the Batman editorial office, and his wife Kim had read it and had hated it. They both disliked it a lot, but she really wanted to do something about it. And they were working on Suicide Squad, and they asked if they could have the character. DC wasn't doing anything with her anymore, obviously. They hadn't killed her, shockingly. And so they asked if they could have the character, and they allowed them because they didn't care about the character, obviously. And they started to introduce her in Suicide Squad as Oracle. As at first she was just a voice on a computer. Eventually she became also the little face icon that she is. And then of like 10 or 15 issues later, they actually like reveal that this is Barbara Gordon in a wheelchair by a computer, suddenly an amazing hacker. I mean, she was always smart, so that makes sense. And over time, she works more frequently with the Suicide Squad and eventually takes over for Amanda Waller for some time. So after they had done that, they decided to go back during Batman Chronicles, which were sort of like these side stories that people were telling, and it was an anthology series, so different writers and artists were working on it, and they got part of Batman Chronicles number 5 to be Oracle Year 1, and they wanted to tell that origin story. And they more or less tell what happens to Barbara in The Killing Joke from Barbara's perspective. And they do some really excellent things in it, but they go beyond that as well. So you get her perspective on being shot, her perspective on the aftermath of being shot, being in the hospital, what happens immediately following her father is eventually being released, saved by Batman coming back to visit her. And then they take it further and they show sort of the year after she is put in this wheelchair and what has happened to her and the way that she copes with being in the wheelchair and the way that she copes with learning how to fight again, learning how to be self-sufficient again, the training she goes through, all of these different things. And it was a really interesting story.
And she takes down a money laundering Cruella de Vil.
She does. And that's the first time she realizes that she can be more or less Batgirl without having to be Batgirl. She can be behind the computer screen and she can do those things the same way that she used to. And of course they added in a thing, because everything's got to be about Batman. They added in a thing where Batman knew that she was going through all of this and knew that she wouldn't listen to him if he just went to her and offered some suggestions. So he befriends her in a chat room and suggests the man that eventually trains her how to fight in the chair, which was a nice little touch, even if it doesn't need to be Batman. But
yeah, I thought that was interesting, where she's saying, Batman and Dad are not going to help me, I'm going to do this myself, and then unbeknownst to her, Batman helps her. Something that kind of mystifies me about Oracle is that she's somehow fighting using these sticks, but how does that work in practice? I can't visualize that.
Well, so, I mean, as much as you can visualize it through comics, because there's no actual motion, she does fight frequently with I believe they're Screama sticks, which is the same thing that Nightwing uses. And so she has them in her chair so she can just pull them out and start hitting people. Throughout the Birds of Prey series, and several times, she fights several times. She doesn't fight a lot. She's not frequently in hand-to-hand combat in the chair. But she does sometimes do it. But they also show her exercising, so she stays as fit as possible. There's a moment, one of my favorite moments in the series. There's a storyline, I think it's called Between Dark and Dawn. It's when Gail Simone was writing the series, where she has Brainiac take over Oracle's body, and in doing that, it like overwrites some of her neural networks, and it allows her to walk without actually being able to walk. Like, her spine still doesn't work, but it's a Brainiac thing. It's comics, just roll with it. So she gets up out of the chair, and she's been working with the Black Canary this entire time, who is arguably one of the top 4 fighters in the DC universe. And she's able to take down Black Canary because Canary underestimates her. And as there's a shot, I would say, but there's a panel where Canary's on the ground and she says, "How do you have such amazing upper body strength?" And then she looks and she sees the chair and she goes, "Oh, right." So there's this understanding within the Birds of Prey that Barbara is still extremely strong and extremely talented and a capable fighter. As for the physics of how it works, I believe she leans forward a lot. I don't really know. I mean, obviously there's momentum pushing forward when she's swinging the sticks, and maybe she locks the wheels. I don't know how it works exactly. She does have usually a electric wheelchair, so maybe that's helpful somehow. I'm not sure the actual physics of it, but she does fight on occasion. She's never shown to be like an amazing hand-to-hand fighter against someone who has use of all of their limbs, but she can hold her own.
Okay.
Which is nice.
Yeah.
And she's respected, essentially.
Okay.
Mostly she's behind computers.
Okay, yeah, because it's just hard to imagine that someone who is, like, stationary in a wheelchair could be sort of fleet on their wheels, I guess. And you need a hand to control the wheelchair, and if you got sticks in both hands, it's unless you're an octopus. I mean,
I don't know. I'm sure like, obviously it's comics, so there's some suspension of disbelief. I'm sure if they actually had to figure it out, someone could.
Yeah.
These people can figure out anything. She could sit in a very compact wheelchair and really, make use of it. I mean, people play basketball in wheelchairs, and do all sorts of other interesting things, which is one of the reasons why I would love to get a not bad version of Oracle on some kind of screen, television or movies, just so that people could like see someone being awesome in a wheelchair. But yeah, I mean, she doesn't do a lot of outside the clock tower as she is generally depicted, but she is capable. She can defend herself if necessary, I think is more or less what that was about. Mm-hmm. Her not feeling helpless.
And I ran across a blog called Becoming the Villainous, where the writer mentioned that there was in Birds of Prey 123 and 124, Barbara Gordon went up against the Joker and
yes.
I guess beat the crap out of him.
I gotta remember exactly. There are a few times when Barbara goes up against quote unquote the Joker. The first time is great because it's very meant to be Silence of the Lambs-esque. So the entire thing is her on the other side of two-way glass. So he doesn't know who he's talking to, but she knows who she is. That's the first time that they've ever met. And it's a really interesting comic. That's Birds of Prey number 16. But 123 and 124 I got to remember because the Barbara's not fascination with, but Barbara's sort of trauma with the Joker is an ongoing thing in Birds of Prey. They don't dwell on it, but they do bring it up several times. There's also a series after Batman dies in Final Crisis, quote unquote dies. He actually gets sent back in time traveling bullet, whole thing, where she it's called Oracle the Cure, which is like her own little like 3-part series, and you see that she still has trauma. She thinks that a cup of tea is a gun when she wakes up. But yes, so I'm looking it up, sorry, Birds of Prey 123, she does come up against the Joker again, and she does win. I know she does. 123 and 124 are near the end of the series. So the first volume of Birds of Prey ended with 127. Of course, this is not going to tell me exactly what happens in 123. Stop it. It's been a while since I've read this one.
Yeah, well, what was written on Becoming the Villainous, it said, Oracle, mastermind and puppet master of the superhero community, comes face to face with the Joker and tells him, "You took nothing from me." She proceeds to fight him from her wheelchair, armed only with 2 eskrima, and win, smashing the Joker's famed smile, if only temporarily. So
yeah, it's definitely, like you said, I mean, she is able to fight from the wheelchair. I don't know how much of a fighter the Joker is.
Combat is not something we think of in terms of the Joker.
Right.
He's
like,
more of a guerrilla fighter.
Isn't entirely a combat villain. Like, he's got his henchmen, he's got his Joker gas, and he's more of a mastermind than anything. But yeah, and this was when Gail Simone had stopped writing the book. I'm refreshing my memory because it's been a little while.
Yeah, and we should talk about Gail Simone too, because she's been I guess she has actually organized a group on this issue of women in refrigerators, and where in many I guess it's been mostly in DC Comics, maybe other places too, but like women are in some way harmed solely to get at the men in their lives, and the story is about the guy and not the woman who has the violence done against her.
Yeah, Gail Simone is, at least early on, was quite well known for Women in Refrigerators because she wrote that website before she had really done much with comics. She didn't join Birds of Prey until 2003. She had written Deadpool before that, and possibly some other comics. I know she got Birds of Prey because of Deadpool, but so she created this website, Women in Refrigerators, which I'm sure your listeners are probably familiar with, which, as you said, is about female characters who are killed. They're not just killed. It's killed, maimed, depowered, or some other horrible thing has happened to them in service of the male character's storyline. And it comes from an issue of Green Lantern where the Green Lantern comes home to find his girlfriend literally murdered and stuffed into his fridge. I wouldn't say that it's primarily DC characters. I don't have a list in front of me to tell you when it has happened. Of course, that issue is sort of the quintessential Women in Refrigerators, but I know some people, and I'm one of them, who would argue that probably almost the essential Woman in a Refrigerator is actually Elektra, because she was created to die. Her purpose when she was originally written into the Daredevil comics was to show up, to have Matt fall in love with her, and then to die horribly. And I don't know that she was necessarily intended to come back. I know she came back immediately in like a separate...
Yeah, well, she was so popular that they couldn't keep her dead.
Right, like she came back pretty quickly, but she wasn't allowed to intersect with Daredevil's story because the plan was to have him be sad about it for a really long time. And so the point of Elektra was that she was going to make Matt Murdock sad by dying. And that ultimately becomes like what the Women in Refrigerators trope is all about. It's not about that character dying for the sake of the character or being hurt for the sake of the character. Or in the case of someone like Scarlet Witch being driven insane like several times and having her children murdered for no reason. That it's not about that female character. So Barbara Gordon in this case isn't shot because she's Barbara Gordon. She isn't shot because she's Batgirl. Or because she was Batgirl. I believe at that point she had technically quote unquote retired. But it's because it's not who she is in relation to like herself and her own ability. It's who she is related to. She's not shot because she's Batgirl. She's shot because she's Commissioner Gordon's daughter. Yeah. She's actually shot because she answers the door. If she hadn't answered the door, maybe that wouldn't have happened. Maybe something else would have happened to her, but she is not, none of that happens to her because of who she is. It happens because of who her father is. The point is to drive her father insane. The point is not to hurt Batgirl.
Yeah.
So,
and by the way, Oracle Year One also points out how kind of odd it was that Gordon's home was strangely unguarded. And it kind of tries to put in an explainer for that he wants to, look like he's not, overly bothered by or, not afraid of things. But it's like, what, really?
Yeah, the thing, she gets mad at him, and that's one of the things I really like about Year One, is it allows Barbara to be pissed. She's mad at her father. She is mad at Batman. She's mad at herself too. The whole thing is one of the parts of, not that story, but one of the parts of one of the early Suicide Squad issues that she's in, somewhere in the 40s, number 48 or something, is that she's learning how to shoot a gun. And the question is always, who are you trying to kill? Because if you're going to shoot a gun, you're trying to kill someone. And she comes back to things like she's trying to kill herself, she's trying to kill her father, she's trying to kill Batman, she's trying to kill the Joker. It's all the people that she blames for what happened to her. And year one allows her to grapple with that in a really good and interesting way. Like, I would say a really good way. So she yells, like you said, at her father for, why didn't you put a guard on your house? You knew what was there, what was out there. You are the commissioner of the Gotham City Police Department. You're Batman's like best friend.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the 1966 TV show Gotham City.
Right, exactly. Like, this is scary Gotham City where murder happens, and why are you being an idiot? And of course she's like, I don't know if he says it or if she says it, but it's like, you don't want to project this idea that you are any different than anyone else in the community, that you are somehow afraid of any of these villains. But that mentality cost your daughter her legs and almost her life. So I like that she gets to be angry. She gets to be angry at Batman too. He comes back to the hospital and she's like, this was never about me. Mm-hmm. This was always about you. So I really appreciate the way that Ostrander and Neal were able to write this story that allowed her to sort of address all of the problems that everyone who's ever had a problem with the Killing Joke has, which is that it was never about her. It was always about her father. It was always about Batman. And that's the thing that we don't like. It's not that we don't like the story. It's not that you can't hurt these characters. It's that you have to do it in a way that allows them agency in the story and allows them to be the subject of what is happening to them.
So she comes back as Oracle, and she has a great career in Birds of Prey and in Suicide Squad. And then New 52 comes along, and her spine is miraculously better.
Yeah.
Now, do I understand correctly that I saw somewhere that New 52 Batgirl has PTSD from the Joker's attack? So this is not... Yeah. It's not like she was never injured. It's that somehow they were able to fix her spine?
Yes. So New 52, when they launched it, made all the characters younger. Oh, hush. Sorry, I have a cat. It did this weird thing where it changed the continuity. It changed the continuity so that many of the characters were younger than they were originally. And a lot of things were changed. They didn't fully change the backstory. They just changed pieces of it. So instead of her spine being severed by the bullet, it was only injured by the bullet in a way that made her a paraplegic, but not in a way that made it so it could never be fixed. They just didn't have the ability. So she was Oracle for, I think, a year. In the New 52 continuity. Mm-hmm. She got her spine fixed by this, I don't know if it's nanotech, it's some kind of implant that's in her spine that's sort of holding the whole thing together and making it work. And so she still has, all of the things that happened in The Killing Joke still happened. And she still became Oracle, she still created the Birds of Prey. But then she went and she got this experimental surgery, it worked. And now she's dealing with both the PTSD from what happened to her in The Killing Joke and also the constant anxiety that the implant will fail, which it does happen. That does happen a few times.
Because I found, well, at least one person back in 2011 when the announcement came out, someone who named Jill Pantozzi, who is a comics columnist and has muscular dystrophy, was very disappointed when Oracle was kind of retconned out of existence, because that's a representative of that demographic of comics readers.
Yeah, it was unfortunate in a lot of ways when they took her out of the chair, because in addition to the fact that she, the largest thing that they did, of course, was exactly what Jill's talking about, which is they erased the only comic book character other than Charles Xavier who is in the chair. who spends their entire life in the chair, and who's still a superhero, even though they're in a wheelchair, which is a huge boon to people who, are in wheelchairs, who are, struggling with the fact that society sees them as being less capable. And this offered them a character that was powerful and interesting and flawed, and wasn't Charles Xavier, who could also sometimes walk for no reason. I'm not really up on my Charles Xavier stuff.
Yeah,
but
I remember some instances where it was fixed, or he had some kind of tech that helped him to walk or something.
Right, or some kind of telekinesis. I don't know, something that helped him walk. So there were several times when they got Charles Xavier up and out of the chair. But Barbara Gordon, for the 10 years plus, I mean, she was technically Oracle for more than 20 years. But for 10 years in the pages of Birds of Prey, where she was this major character in the comics, because of the way, especially that Ostrander Neal created her and made her so useful. She was a character who popped up a lot. She's in video games. She was an important character to the DC universe, and she was in a wheelchair, and the wheelchair did not matter. It only mattered in the sense that she couldn't jump up and kick things, but she could still fight. She could still be really powerful. She was one of the most intelligent people in the DC universe. She was well respected. She led a team. She, took on major villains and was, going toe to toe with some of the biggest bad guys. And they decided that they wanted to make her Batgirl again. So that was the largest negative that came out of that. The other one was, of course, that we lose the other Batgirls. Cass Kane was already gone, but Stephanie Brown was currently Batgirl, so they had to retcon that. They ended up having to take away a lot of stuff from these characters that people really cared about. And I think a lot of Batgirl fans would tell you that Cassandra Cain is one of the most interesting characters in comics, and also certainly probably the most interesting Batgirl, because of what the character meant for her in a way that it didn't mean for Barbara Gordon, because Barbara was getting her big character moment as Oracle. So Cassandra Cain got this big character moment as Batgirl. She was introduced to be that character, and we lost all of that. We lost a lot of the really interesting conversation that came out of that character, because they decided to put Barbara Gordon back in the suit. Mm-hmm. So it's unfortunate. They have done very good things. They made the right decision making Gail Simone the writer on the first run of Batgirl. They made some good choices, but the New 52 had a lot of flaws. Yeah. And unfortunately, that was one of them. And you also couldn't do that. You couldn't pull her out of the chair and then decide to put her back in it. Mm-hmm. There was no easy way to do that, because then you have to grapple with what it's like to go back into the chair and find a way to tell that story without making it sound like she's upset. That she's not able to do these things again, because that's ableist, and you don't want to backtrack on all of these great things that, Oracle was. So hopefully one day we'll figure out how to do a character like that again.
But it just struck me as a bit insensitive on the part of, non-wheelchair using editorial people who, didn't think about that demographic of comics readers. I suppose from a larger business standpoint it made sense, but I don't see why not leave her as Oracle.
Right. I'm not going to pretend to have been in the minds of DC editorial at the time, because that would be crazy. And also those minds are probably scary, but I can say that obviously making Barbara Gordon Batgirl again for a generation that had never known her as Batgirl, because she was not Batgirl ever in the time that I've been alive, up until the New 52.
If she hadn't been doing it for a while in '88, that was
right.
late '70s, early '80s. She
hadn't been doing it for a little while once Killing Joke came out. There are comics in which she is Batgirl. There was a comic that happened about the same time as the Killing Joke, right before, where editorial knew Killing Joke was coming. So they told the writer of that book, you have to make us care about her because she's going to get crippled in the next one. So they did this whole thing. But there's a whole generation of people that you can be like, you can make this big reveal, right? This character is going to be Batgirl again. And that was a big thing in the New 52, was like, Dick Grayson's going to be Nightwing again, because he'd been Batman up to that point. Because there were two Batmans, because, reasons. That you were going to have all these new things. I think they brought back one of the other Flashes. They did a whole, like, different thing with Alan Scott, Green Lantern. They did all of these new things, or I guess old things, with the New 52, and that, like, it made sense, I imagine, in their minds to be like, oh, one more reveal, one more throwback we can do is Barbara Gordon is going to be Batgirl again, because haven't we all been waiting for that? And there was just like this collective groan.
And millennials say who?
Yeah, right. Like, why do we want Barbara Gordon to be Batgirl? Why was that a thing that we ever cared about? And I mean, I knew Barbara Gordon as Batgirl, even though she wasn't Batgirl for me, because I just knew that's where she came from. But Barbara Gordon will always be Oracle, because that's the character that I think did the most for her. Especially because they, like, some of the deep writing on her really happened in Birds of Prey and all of those comics. So it wasn't until Oracle where anyone really gave a crap about her.
Yeah, I mean, originally she was created for the TV show, and they just coordinated it with...
Yes, and they were like, we're going to introduce her in the comics.
Coordinated it with DC so she'd show up in the comics at the same time. But, it was because William Dozier wanted to have, a female hero on the show. And so DC kind of said, well, yeah, okay, we'll just, have this character and she can do stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And they introduced her in the Batman comics, and she never had her own comic. The first time Batgirl ever headlined a comic was with Cassandra Cain in the 90s.
Wow.
And it's a great comic. But it's just interesting to think about. She's the second Batgirl, but she's the first one with her own comic. And of course, Stephanie Brown got hers after that, and now Barbara Gordon has hers. But it's different. It's definitely not the same. Birds of Prey has never been the same since they made her not Oracle. It's just a different book in that sense. And I don't think it works as well. I don't think it's bad ever. Like, I think it's been good. I think some of the New 52 stuff is terrible, but that's New 52's problem more than anything. But, so the Rebirth stuff is just great. The stuff that they've been doing in the Rebirth line has been great. I think we've all accepted at this point, 7-8 years in, that Barbara Gordon is Batgirl, that she's been Batgirl almost as long as she was Oracle in the Birds of Prey stories. Obviously, she was Oracle for 20 years, like I said, but she's been Batgirl for a long time, and it doesn't seem like it's going to go anywhere. It would be great if they could find a way to make a character like that. I don't know how they would, if they could make her Oracle again without it feeling like fan service, without it feeling weak, without it feeling like they're doing something where they in the story have to make her grapple with being back in the chair, with having to use a wheelchair again, and if they can make it not something where she's feeling sorry for herself, because no one wants to relive that. She was so powerful as Oracle but they erased so much of that from her continuity. It's hard to keep track of, but it's really unfortunate. It's a good thing we still have all of the Birds of Prey comics. There were 127 in the original run. There were another 15 after that. So we've got plenty of material, plus everything that came before it, No Man's Land, all the video games. Yeah.
Sure, yeah, it still exists, and nowadays old comics are easily obtained electronically, even legally. Exactly. So,
don't have to steal them anymore.
Like I found Oracle Year One, just okay, here it is, download, read, okay. So
yeah, I actually ended up doing that myself too. I don't own a copy of Year One, but I bought the Comixology copy for like $2 and $3 and bought that and was able to read it. And then I actually ended up going to the Bowling Green Library because they have it in the physical form in the pop culture library, because I wanted to read what some of the reactions were to that character in the letter column, which was really interesting. And a lot of people really loved the character. It was really fun to look back at sort of the initial reaction to it. And people were there for it. They were in Suicide Squad. They were interested in what was coming. They wanted to do more with Oracle. It was such a cool thing to do with the Barbara Gordon character. And, some people, even back then, even in the 80s, 90s, early 90s, sort of lamenting what had happened in The Killing Joke. It was nice to see that it wasn't always people who were very happy with Killing Joke, that it was, even from the beginning, something that people were critical of.
Mm-hmm.
So that was nice. I was worried I was going to go back and they were going to be like, this is the greatest story ever written. Even back then. But no, it was nice.
Okay. The Killing Joke is published by DC Comics. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode or the direction of the podcast generally. What are we doing right? Where have we screwed up? Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Tweet us at deconcomics. Like our Facebook page or join our active Facebook group. Support the show by pledging at patreon.com/deconcomics. Our tiers start at just $2 a month. A funny outtake from my talk with Tricia is available to all our Patreon supporters, along with Will's outtake, To the Batpole's outtakes, and more. Pledge at least $4 a month to get both of our Patreon-only series, Spider-Man 1963 and Tim Catches Up with the MCU. That's patreon.com/deconcomics to join the fun. Also, please help us get noticed by reviewing us on Apple or any other podcast source. Do your shopping at deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon so that we get a percentage of the sale. And share our episodes on your social media. We appreciate your support in bringing Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Batpoles to a larger audience. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Mulele and I will be here next week to talk about 2 more comics submitted to us by their creators. And in 2 weeks, here on Deconstructing Comics and recorded at that same BGSU Batman conference, Mike Barr, longtime writer of such titles as Batman and the Outsiders, gave a keynote speech, and you'll hear the whole thing, including the Q&A session. That's in 2 weeks. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.